Good evening, everyone. We are now in Ezekiel chapter 19. Now, in Ezekiel chapter 19, it is a standalone and it's a lamentation. This is not a prophetic utterance like how the word of the Lord came to me saying that that pattern is now interrupted in chapter 19. And God is telling Ezekiel. So this word here is you take up and you will be Ezekiel. And this is a lamentation. And by lamentation, it is an idea of beating the breasts. Now, what that means is it is a very sad, a very disappointing, it is a cry, it is a loss. It is in that emotional state where it is a form of mourning. That is what this lamentation is all about. And so when you read chapter 19, as we get into chapter 19, think of it as an ultimate sad song. It is an extremely disappointing, it's a tear jerking, it's something that you really cry out loud. And so the Eastern people, when they have, say, the loss of a loved one, would beat their chest in mourning. And this is the kind of song in chapter 19. And it is regarding to the princes of Israel. And so we need to understand this. At this point in time, Israel is now specifically the house of Judah. So let's do a bit of a background. And it begins with the house of Josiah. Josiah has a few sons that actually succeeded him. So now let me just show you. The three sons come in this form. The first son is Yehoiahaz. Okay, Yehoiahaz. The second son was Jehoiakim. He had a son, Jehoiakim. Otherwise named Jeconiah. And then he had another son by the name of Zedekiah. So I will leave this at the side, and that by way of introduction, the princes that we are discussing here would be Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, not specifically Josiah. Amongst all these, I think that we should be aware that the good king in the history that we have seen would be Josiah. But he did not live long. Josiah lived at a time where there were a lot of major nations around him. Particularly, we have Egypt, then we have the Moabites, then we have the Ammonites, then we have the Assyrians, and then we have the Babylonians. It was the turn of the Assyrians and then the evergreen Egyptian kingdom had decided to fight the Babylonians. And on the way to fight the Babylonians in Carchemish, Josiah, for some reason, had decided that he would take on the Pharaoh, and this is Pharaoh Necho. And in that war, Josiah was killed by a stray arrow. And with that, we have the advent of Jehoiakim, and then uh, in a matter of a period of time, then replaced by Jehoiakim, who didn't reign for very long, and then replaced by his son Jehoiakim, who were actually removed in a matter of months, and we don't read of him very much in the Bible, and then replaced by Zedekiah. And so this particular lamentation in chapter 19 is a lengthy description of the house of Josiah, the last few generations of the kings of Judah, or we could call them the kings of Israel as a whole, but they are from the house of Judah. And so now chapter 19 says, say this to them. It says here, how was your mother a lioness? This one here should be, how is your mother a lioness? Not what is your mother a lioness, and that's not the way it is expressed. How is your mother a lioness? She lay down among the lions. So think of it this way: Israel as a nation and Josiah as the king was in an environment where there were many lions, and this would be symbolic of the many nations, powerful nations around her. Among the young lions, she nourished her cubs. This would be the sons of Josiah. She brought up one of her cubs, and he became a young lion. He learned to catch prey, and he devoured men. The nations also heard of him. He was trapped in their pit, and they brought him with chains to the land of Egypt. This begins by talking about Jehoiakim, right? This would be Jehoiakim. He decided to attack Egypt, and he was caught, and then he was brought to Egypt. So many of these are stories that you can read from Second Kings. And this would be in, I think we can see from chapters 22 onwards. And so Jehoiakim is now described as this cub, and they were caught. The nations know of him. He learned to be like a young lion, catching prey, devouring men. And as lions, when they start having meat in their mouth, wants more meat. And so he went to attack Egypt, and they were trapped, and they brought him with chains to the land of Egypt. So Jehoiakim was captured, brought to Egypt. In verse 5, says, when she, as Israel, saw that, she waited, and her hopes were lost. Now, I think we need to actually retranslate this. Understand this. when she saw herself disillusioned. This word waited in verse 5, it is really to be disillusioned. Be disillusioned, as in that the hope that she had in the king or in the young lion was actually lost, because the young lion was captured in Egypt. And so she took another of her cubs, another of the princes, and made him a young lion. So where are we? So the first one is right here. It was Jehoahaz, and then he was replaced by Jehoiakim. Now, one of the things we find is that uh, Jehoahaz reigned for 3 months. Then we have Jehoiakim, and Pharaoh Necho was the Pharaoh, had the appointment of Jehoiakim through the, I guess, the agreement of the people of Israel. And so now we are talking about Jehoiakim. Kim. And he roved among the lions, among the kings around, and he became a young lion. He learned to catch prey. He devoured men. And so we find that this she was from the house of Josiah and really representing Israel, appointing one son and then the next son. And so we are at number 2. He, Jehoiakim, knew their desolate places, laid waste their cities. The land was, with its fullness, was desolated. So all you can see is, by the noise of his roaring, what you are seeing here is this young lion actually decimated Israel. He was not a good king. So go back and read 2 Kings chapters 23 onwards. And then we find that, and then verse 8, and then the nations gathered around him from the provinces on every side, and they spread the net over him, and he was trapped in their pit. Now, who were these nations? In chapter 8, you can see this from 2 Kings chapter 24. These were the troops of the Assyrians, right? The Babylonians, the Syrians, Moab, Ammon. They came to attack Judah. And so all of this is set in 2 Kings 24. And at the end of the day, God raised up these nations and he was caught. And so what happens is this. With Jehoiakim, it says they put him in a cage with chains. They brought him to the king of Babylon. They brought him in nets that his voice should no longer be heard on the mountains of Israel. Now, this whole aspect is this. One, Jehoiakim, okay, he was caught twice, actually. Once he was released to come back to reign, but the second time he died on the way to Babylon. Now, when he died, he was not buried apparently. And then the people had appointed the son of Jehoiakim, which would be Jehoiakim. Now, this is something that every one of us should be aware of. In this instance, Jehoiakim reigned for 11 years. Jehoiakim only reigned for 3 months, or even less than 3 months. Nebuchadnezzar did not like him, and he was put in a cage with chains and was brought to Babylon. So Jeconiah or Jehoiakim, who is the son of Jehoiakim, was brought to Babylon. Now, there was another king in place, and that would be number 4, Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the son of Josiah, and he reigned for 11 years. And at the end of the day, he too was brought in chains to Babylon, and he died there. And so they brought him in nets. His voice should no longer be heard on the mountains of Israel. By the time Jehoiakim, who is Jeconiah, as well as Zedekiah, were both taken to Babylon, and they died there. And they died there. By this time, there will be no kings in Israel. So his voice would be the voice of king. The king's voice will no longer be heard on the mountains of Israel. So up till verse 9 is a lamentation of how sad Israel would be, by which time, at the end of verse 9, there will be no more Israel. There will be no more kings. And right after Zedekiah, there will be no more sons, because the sons were killed before his eyes, before the eyes of Zedekiah were gorged out, so that the son's death would have been the last things that he had seen. A really horrifying and terrible event. We come to verse 10. Now, verse 10 turns the lamentation illustration from the lioness and the lion cubs to a vine. Now, in this case, we begin to see this. Your mother was like a vine in your, this word here is in the, I guess you can say, in the likeness, right? In the likeness, like blood. In the same likeness, planted by the waters, fruitful, full of branches because of many waters. So basically, we're now talking about Israel, right? About Israel. And Israel is really like, well, in this case, a vine. And so understand that the illustration is a vine, very fruitful, lots of branches, because it was by the side of waters. Now, this mother here, like the lioness, would represent Josiah, as well as Israel as a whole. She had strong branches for scepters of rulers. The branch of a vine, when it grows into an old state, is straight and strong. And so rulers have scepters. Now, let me explain to you. Now, in verse 11, rulers are seen as El. are seen as El, which is a Hebrew word for translated loosely as God. And so we would represent the Aleph with a ox head, and we would represent the Lamed with a shepherd's staff. And so this scepter is the Lamed. And all the rulers wear crowns, which are the horns. And they have a scepter, which they hold in their hand. And so when you talk about strong branches, it's the vine that has strong branches, and it can be used for scepters of rulers, and the rulers can make it into the staff that depicts or symbolize power. She towered in stature above the thick branches and was seen in her height amidst the dense foliage. And so you can think of it that this would have been the power of the kingdom of Israel. And it could be reminiscent of the kingdoms of uh, Uriah, not Uriah, the kingdoms of Uzziah and Jotham, the silver kingdoms, and then the gold kingdoms of David and Solomon. And so this is a poetic language that describes Israel as a nation. But she was plucked up in a fury. This idea of plucked up in verse 12 was uprooted in wrath, and she was cast down to the ground, and the east wind dried her fruit. Now remember, I have often described to you the east wind. If this was Israel, and then this is the Mediterranean Sea, the east wind will always be from this side as it blows over, and this is the east wind. And it is a dry wind because it originates from the desert, very dry. And then it was told to us that her strong branches were broken and it withered, the fire consumed them. So oftentimes you also hear that when branches are broken, they will dry up because the dry east wind will come, not only drying the fruit, it will dry up the branches, and then people will collect them up, and then it would be thrown into the fire and it was gotten rid of. Now in verse 13, we are now told, and now she is planted in the wilderness. So we're talking about the vine where it was with many waters, very fruitful. Now she is transplanted. Now in verse 13, the word here is transplanted. I think that would be a better way of explaining it. Transplanted. Uprooted, right? This is uproot. And transplanted, and now in the wilderness, the midbar, the desert. Now the desert is not a bad place, but depending on the context, the midbar is a place where the ecology or the ecosystem is very balanced. However, it will have to strive in that balance where it is dry and a thirsty land. So this particular midbar is not just lack of cultivation, but it is described as desolate. I guess you could call it a dry country, no water, right? No water. Whereas previously, many waters, now there is no water. And then it's also considered a place where people are figuratively thirsty, longing for water. That would be a way of describing this particular land where the vine is now transplanted. Again, remember, this is very poetic, in a very poetic language. And it says this, and fire came out from the staff, which are the branches, and devoured her fruit. So if you think of it this way, that if this was the branch of a vine tree, and you have leaves coming out, but from the branches, you will also find fruits. The fruits will come out of this as grapes. The description here tells us that fire came out, and the fire ate up the fruits. So this word here, devour, is actually a word to eat. So when fire eats up something, it literally consumes, wraps it up, and then it's gone. And then it says, so that she has no strong branch or no sturdy rod. Remember, the rod is about scepters. No scepter for ruling. And it means that there is an end of rulers. And so this particular lamentation is saying that after Josiah, we had Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim, and then Jehoiakim, and then Zedekiah, and after that, no more. And so this is an end of a scepter for ruling. So in the end of this song or sad song, this is a lamentation and has become a lamentation. Or and this word has become should not be stated this way. The word here is to become, and it will become in the grammar of the sentence. This is a lamentation, and it will become a lamentation. So this is a lamentation in Ezekiel chapter 19, and it will become a lamentation when all these things take place, and they will all cry because there will be no more kings in Judah. So by which time, maybe as a lamentation, as it's been described, God is speaking about its impending end of Zedekiah. And by the time Zedekiah is taken into Babylon blind, there will be no more, and people will soon be crying and mourning over Israel and Judah. And with this, we come to the end of our session today.